Welcome back, everyone. And we are going to now take a high level overview of the three diaphragms in the body. As we go on in our journey with anatomy, we will take each of these and break them down a little bit more so that they are more understandable and that we're able to integrate them more into our medical and professional practices and how we infuse them and able to layer in our knowledge as we continue to grow anatomically in yoga and Ayurveda. So we begin with breath and the three diaphragms in the body, specifically starting with the most popular one. We have the thoracic diaphragm. This thoracic diaphragm is shaped like a parachute. So it will be connected to the lower six ribs, attaching itself mainly to the L1 and L3 lumbar spine. With that, when we inhale, it will flatten, and this flattening in the diaphragm gives room for air to fill up and to expand into the lungs. And then as we exhale, it will dome back up, kind of presses everything up and over, and we open up and kind of swaying out the ribs, really expand, and we create this hot air balloon, mushroom bubble shape. And so it's a lot of inhaling and exhaling when we do that, flattening and expanding, so contracting and expanding, and that's where we get that dome-like shape of our diaphragm. Now, we also move into the pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor diaphragm kind of consists of technically three diaphragms, three different pelvic floor diaphragms. In general, the pelvic floor has three hammocks. And then based on the apertures of release will determine an android, a gynecoid, or an intergender pelvic floor. So we would have one of the three. And then based on the individual, we will discover what those overlapping hammocks or muscles are. But those hammocks or those muscles are framed by 3 points. The main point being the pubic bone point on any of the pelvic floors. And then it will be bordered along with the iliac crest, which will attach it. It's where it will attach the muscles, as you can see here, these muscles here. And then the sacrum is where the last part it will attach to the very back. So we have the pubic, the iliacs, and the sacral, the coccyx. Okay. Any of the three pelvic floors are going to have that attachment. All right. We don't use boy and girl pelvis because it's just outdated and it's not inclusive. The suprafascia or deep perineal pouch is located towards the pubic bone area of the gynecoid pubic bone, or I'm sorry, pelvic floor. That makes up a very big difference between the two. Just if you wanted to know. Okay. And then we are going to scroll right ourselves into the brain diaphragms. And the brain diaphragms, we have technically 4. I'm highlighting 4, but some have only gone over 3. And then of that, we also have what is known as the different sheaths or the layers that reside in the brain diaphragm. So tentorium cerebelli divides the cranial cavity into supratentorial and infratentorial compartments. So the tentorium cerebelli, which you see here, it's highlighted here for you on your platform, on your screen. This supratentorial is the superficial, it's the outermost, and the infratentorial is the innermost. And so it's going to cover all the way from the occipital lobes all the way to the cerebellum. So it covers a pretty big compartment, and then it divides it into the two. Falx cerebri, is the large crescent-shaped fold that protects down into the longitudinal fissure, separating right and left cerebral hemispheres. And we see the falx cerebri when we take a peek of it labeled here, right in the middle, divided by the right and left hemisphere. Okay. The cerebellar falx, which is the one on the very, very bottom here, this one's the vertical fold that lies inferiorly to the tentorium cerebelli, which remember is here. So inferior, so it's underneath it, and it is posterior part of the cranial fossa. So it's also on the front part of the cranial section, and it partially separates the cerebellar hemisphere. So these the hemispheres left and right on the bottom where the brain connects also has its own, and this little line that you see in the right at the falx cerebri that kind of continues down is known as the cerebellar falx. So it is the version that would basically be for the lower half or the lower hemisphere of the brain. And trying to keep it as in layman terms as possible so as to not let it be too confusing or complicated. So we have a sellar diaphragm, and it's the sellar diaphragm starts like with an S. So not to confuse anyone, it's the smallest durafold. It's a circular sheet of dura that's suspended between the sphenoid processes, forming a partial roof over the hypophyseal fossa, and it covers the pituitary gland in the fossa and allows for passage of the pituitary stalk. And that's going to be towards the bottom here. So it's not shown on the diaphragm, but it's just low here on the space. That's just kind of a heads up. This is a high level overview of those 4 breakdowns, but this is kind of what the brain diaphragm is made up of, which you really want to know. Okay. And the brain diaphragm is made up of 3 specific layers of fascia, and they're known as the meninges. And that's why here you'll see the meningeal layer. We're going to talk about the meninges now. So the meninges, I just kind of swooped back down. So sorry if that was a little too fast for anyone. The brain diaphragm is made up of the 3 layers of fascia known as the meninges. It's pronounced meninges, and they are the pia mater, which is kind of like pia mater is like that silky camisole that I know my teacher Kristen Leal speaks of it as. It's that innermost layer. It's like that mother, very silky, shakti. It's a very it's that really soft layer that is covering sheath of the nervous system. And then we have the arachnoid matter, and that layer kind of more resembles a spider web, and it's very fibrous, and it offers protection, and it's also where the cerebral fluid is able to flow through. And then we have the dura mater, and the dura mater is kind of like that tough matter. Um, it's like the coat that you put on top of like your thermal that's over your silky camisole. And that's kind of like how I remember it. Like when my teacher Kristen Leal taught me that, I've never forgotten it. And I always remember it as such. And so this is the most fibrous and dense layer that has its own layers. And if you look below, you'll see the falx cerebri, which is one of the layers that we talked about earlier. And it's also now you'll see as one of the layers that we talk about here for the diaphragm of the brain. You'll also notice that we revisit the tentorium cerebelli, and the tentorium cerebelli is also part of this dura mater layer of that more external, harder, coarser, more fibrous, more dense outer layer, outer shell. And then you'll also see the dural venous, and the dural venous is the matter that moves, like the sinus ventricles. So these are the main matters, and altogether they kind of move like a jellyfish when they're all 3 together. So you have the brain, and you have the pelvic, and you have the thoracic, all working together and moving up and down, kind of like in this jellyfish movement. Now, the cerebral falx, the diaphragm here does move down and up in correlation to how we breathe, but it's not really like powerful, big, giant movement. It's so tiny that you barely even know it even did it. And so that is kind of that movement. We don't even recognize that we're breathing, or apneustic breathing that we've talked about back in pranayama and in meditation, that when we're have that apneustic breath, we don't even know that we're breathing, and it's just so subtle. And that is kind of like that subtleness of how our brain diaphragm moves when we're breathing and doing these respiratory practices. So let's just recap that real quick. The android and the gynecoid are the main differences between is that the android is more narrow, and it has two apertures, and it is not as flexible, but it is stronger. And then we have the gynecoid, which is much more subtle and much more flexible, has more of a fan shape so that it's always ready for reproduction, or so we can joke, right? And for those of us that it's not a joke, I do apologize in the most sensitive way, but just trying to be more lighthearted here. It's in a fan, and that way it gives more space for reproduction. And then we also know that it has the three apertures that are excretory. Lastly, we have the intergender pelvis, and so it may have three, it may have four, it may have two. It just depends on the individual. And so when in anatomically speaking, then that's how we would actually determine your gender, is by knowing what your pelvic floor looks like. And then we have the brain pelvis, which consists of the pia mater, which is like that innermost matter, so more infra. And then we have the arachnoid matter, which is more web-like, more fibrous, kind of like a thermal. And then we have the dura mater, which is a lot thicker, which also in and of itself has its own sheath, such as the phalanx cerebri, the dural vein of sinuses, and the tentorium cerebelli. And it's really protects the nervous system. And then all of those working together, the mushroom shaped diaphragm of the thoracic diaphragm, all of them working together deflate or flatten when we inhale, and inflate and expand when we exhale. And so this is very subtle movements when it comes to the brain and the pelvic floor, but the diaphragm is the most expressive of the three. So I hope that's helpful. Please go ahead and watch some of the videos that are recommended here. Kristen Leal has amazing resources on her site. She is an extremely well-versed anatomy teacher that I study under personally, and I encourage you to check out what she has and to review some of the material that she has as well, so that it will help you for your test your knowledge portion of your quiz, and see if there's any questions or comments below that we can go ahead and do them together and talk about them and grow. And I'll see you in embodying the practice. Namaste.